BP, Canadian Natural, Cenovus, ConocoPhillips, Imperial Oil, Husky, Suncor Syncrude, and Teck. I'm proud to say world-class pilot facility that started up a year ago. You've removed the bitumen molecules and you have to replace them with something. So, and the density of bitumen and water are the same.
Welcome to episode 12 of Crownsmen Energy, featuring Canada's Oil Sands Innovation Alliance, also known as COSIA. And today we have their Director of Water, John Brogly, and he's here to discuss water innovation in oil sands, their current projects, and much more. But first, let's thank our sponsors. Today we actually have Pipeline Machinery. Pipeline Machinery International is a global CAT dealer that provides equipment and pipeline solutions to the mainline pipeline construction industry. Since 2005, PLM is a reliable resource for CAT pipe layers, an exceptional and dedicated pipe laying machine. PLM also provides traditional equipment outfitted for pipeline job tasks, custom equipment solutions, technology and services for fleet management, and load monitoring safety solutions. Together with a global product support team and the CAT dealer network, your global partner for pipeline solutions is here. Visit them at plmcat.com. Next up, we have Savona Equipment. Are you working on pipelines, oil and gas projects, renewable energy, or LNG, and need some cash? Well, Savona Equipment has industrial pumps, electrical equipment from motors to transformers, and even surplus pipe and much, much more available now. Visit them at savonaequipment.com, where you will find more equipment every day. And last but not least, we have Power Zone Equipment. When you need a specialized team of world-class engineers for your oil and gas pipelines, dewatering, or any fluid handling needs, you want to visit powerzone.com. In addition to their inventory of rebuilt pumps, motors, engines, they also have an amazing team to design and engineer your systems, no matter the challenge, no matter the location. Get in the zone with PowerZone. Visit them at powerzone.com. Well, let's get on with episode 12 of Crownsmen Energy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Crownsmen Energy. I am your host, Jerrod Downey. Today on the show, we have John Brogly. He is the Director for Water for, let me get this right, Canada's Oil Sands Innovation Alliance, or COSIA. Hello, John. Welcome to Crownsmen Energy.
Hey, great to be here, Jerrod.
I guess you're probably doing like us. You're doing a lot of more online communication these days.
Yeah, absolutely. You can see I'm sitting in my kitchen at the moment. So yeah, we're very used to these tools by now. All of us, I guess, aren't we? Yeah.
Some days it's nice to not have to leave home. Other days you kind of it's there's sort of that. I'm a bit of a pattern person, so I sort of miss. I mean, I come to the studio almost every day, but there's that whole pattern disruption, I think, is actually hard on some people.
Yeah, I like the mix of, so I'm in half-time, odd days on the calendar, and I actually like that mix rather than just working from home. So, and besides, I think human beings like actual face-to-face contact on occasion. I certainly do, and so getting a bit of that is nice for sure.
It's almost like we're designed for it. Let's talk a little bit. You manage the water project portfolio. Can you first tell us a little bit about COSIA, and then your role and your stream in the organization?
Yeah, so COSIA is an alliance of 9 oil sands producers that represent about 90% of the oil sands production. Members, I might also mention the members. They're BP, Canadian Natural, Cenovus, ConocoPhillips, Imperial Oil, Husky, Suncor Syncrude, and Teck. I hope I didn't miss anybody. Pretty sure I got all of them.
We're close.
Yeah, okay. And so, excuse me. So COSIA was formed in 2012 with the express purpose of enabling sustainable development of the oil sands by accelerating the pace of environmental performance improvement through collaborative action and innovation. And so, and the way it works, and I love this anecdote. I like to tell it every time I can. One of the key differences between COSIA and other industry associations is members grant each other use rights to technology. So the whole idea behind COSIA is that if one member's developed a technology or they all do it together, it doesn't matter. They all get access to use that technology in their own facilities. And so in the early days of COSIA, this would have been in probably late 2011 or early 2012, we had a group of our member company lawyers, and they were asked how long it would take to produce an agreement that would allow all of these members to share technology, to grant use rights to each other. And the lawyer's answer was anywhere from 2 years to never. That was the answer.
That's the range.
And that was arranged, and it actually took 4 months to write the first joint venture agreement, the one that I look after. That's the water joint venture agreement. So these things run up, they're over 100 pages, and part of the reason for that is they are literally granting each other use rights. So they keep ownership of the technology, but they grant all of the other members use rights to those technologies. So that's very different as well. So.
Oh, so it's a little bit like a company laying the fiber optics and other companies get to plug into that system in a way, right?
Yeah, for sure, something like that. But the analogy would be they're all laying fiber optic cables and they grant everybody access to all of it. So yeah.
I want to, not to put too fine a pin on it, but why do you think it was it the approach that your organization, you and the organization took, or was there a specific reason that it was expedited so quickly from 2.5 years to never instead of and it was ended up being 4 months? Was there something that you saw that the reason why it was expedited at that rate?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the CEOs of our member companies realized, there are a few iconic environmental incidents, that the ducks on Tailings Pond, things like that made the CEOs realize that they're all in this boat together, and if they don't all improve together, the industry is going to struggle with its social license. And so I think they realize that, at least on the environmental front, it's in all of their collective best interests to set aside their competitive nature and collaborate and cooperate on the environmental front, because if there's an environmental incident, one operator, it doesn't matter who that operator is, the oil sands is painted with that same brush. And so that the driving force and the reason that joint venture agreement only took 4 months is I think the CEOs went to the VP legal and said, we'd really like you to get this done for us, please. And so they did. And so I think the big difference, because it might have taken anywhere from 2 years to never, the big difference is the CEO said they wanted to happen. And so we had support right from the top of our member companies.
Yeah, that's a top-down push is always going to move things along.
It does move things along, yeah.
So I wanted to get into I kind of want to tie. They're separate topics, but I want to, because you are writing these proposals or you're organizing this. I wouldn't say it's called a proposal. It's more of an agreement, and you can clarify that. So what's your background, John, that sort of put you in a position to be able to facilitate this type of interaction between companies and be part of an organization like COSIA?
Well, so I guess a bit of background about myself. I'm a chemical engineer by trade, graduated from McMaster University, or as friends euphemistically called it, the University of Hamilton. Anyway, I worked for 25 years mostly in operations at Dow's facility in Fort Saskatchewan, just northeast of Edmonton. And I left there after 25 years and joined Canadian Natural on the Horizon Oil Sands mine project. And when I joined, the project actually hadn't been sanctioned. So I worked there for about 8 years, and towards the end of that tenure, I had the opportunity to help set up COSIA. And so this is in 2011, and there was a team of myself plus 3 other folks from a handful of our member companies that worked on the foundational documents about how COSIA was going to get set up. A year later, Cosia had been stood up, and it was an actual entity. So they started posting jobs, and I applied for the water director's position, and got that. And so, at least part of the reason it's a little easier for me is that I worked 8 years at an oil sands mine, from engineering to construction to startup, and then before I left, I was the engineering manager for the extraction plant at Canadian Natural's Horizon mine, and yeah, so that's put me in good stead. And as I say, I helped part of a team that helped set up Cosia in the first place.
When you move into, I want to move into the oil sands, the water innovation in the oil sands. And we've got, I think there's about 5 points that we want to cover here. And I started reading early yesterday evening, thinking, oh, I'll spend a couple hours. This has happened to me a few times. And then 4 hours later, I'm going, okay, every time I read something, now I have to look up another term. So I'm going to be here. So finally, at about 1 a.m, I said, okay, you know what? I'm just going to ask John because it's a lot. It's a lot, yeah. And abbreviations for terminology. And, if you're in the industry like yourself, of course, you know them, but I'm going, oh, okay. So I want to just walk through them, kind of step by step. And I wanted to first go on the very simplified version of how water is used in the oil sands. And of course, someone like yourself, it sort of goes without saying, how it is, how it works. But can you just talk about how it's used in the process?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the first thing to remember about the oil sands is there's two sectors that are very, very different. They both produce bitumen from the same ore bodies, but they do it in very, very different ways, and as a result have very different water management challenges. So the mining sector is one where typically the oil sands deposit is within 50 meters of the surface. And so then what you do is you'll strip the overburden, the soil and so on that's on top of that, and then you literally mine it with the largest trucks in the world and some of the largest shovels in the world. Then the water is actually used for mining. You use warm water, you crush the ore, and then mix it with the warm water, hydrotransport it to a separation facility, and the warm water actually causes the bitumen to come away from the ore into the water phase, and then and of course the vast majority of that ore is tailings. So like all surface mines, hard rock mines, the tailings are typically like 96-97% of the ore body.
On a good mine, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so for us, our bitumen's about 15%, so that's fairly high, but still the rest is tailings. And so you separate the bitumen, and water mixture from the tailings. The tailings get treated and then returned to a tailings pond, and then you clean up the bitumen and using a froth treatment process, and then you either ship that. You can ship that using diluent to an upgrader / refinery, or many of oil sands mines actually have upgraders on site, so then you would ship that to your upgrader. So that's the mining business. So the vast majority of water use is in the extraction process. Now, what I will say is that water is used very efficiently in mines, particularly the ones.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
Yeah, so particularly the ones with upgraders. I need to get back to in situ in a second, but the ones with upgraders, the upgrader uses that you bring in water from the Athabasca River, and the reason you do that is because it has to be fresh water. If you use saline water and there's lots of it in the area, the extraction efficiency goes down dramatically, which isn't good. So you use fresh water from the Athabasca River, and we'll talk about how much is used because that's a good story. Use fresh water from the Athabasca River. You use it in your upgrader first. Recycle it in your upgrader, and then the blowdown from the upgrader is the makeup water to the extraction circuit where you're actually contacting the ore. So it's already been reused once before you're even extracting it. So these mines are very efficient on how they use water. And so on the in situ side, typically the deposit is more than 200 meters deep, and there's a couple of ways to manage in situ. but you're basically injecting steam underground and then drawing the bitumen out. So bitumen is very heavy crude oil, so it won't flow unless you heat it. And so you use warm water on the mine side, you use steam injection on the in situ side. So the vast majority of in situ operations are SAGD, which is steam assisted gravity drain. So there's two pipes, one above and one below. One injects steam and the other one is producing well. And so you don't have any tailings with the in situ process. You're just drawing up water and bitumen. And then you have what we call a central processing facility. And that is basically a water treatment process, because the bitumen with some diluent, you add some diluent to it, the bitumen comes out quickly and easily. And so the rest of the operation is just cleaning the water up so you can reuse it. Mm-hmm. And so recycle rates on the mine side are typically about 80%. On the in situ side, they're north of 90%.
Oh, they're higher on the. I was looking through some reports again, and you'll probably need to clarify or correct me on this, but I saw there were reports that Cosia had put out that with some of these technology sharing between the companies and facilitated by Cosia, the efficiencies, there has been a huge increase in efficiency over the last few years. Is that right? I was trying to understand some of these reports, but they were quite detailed.
Yeah. So we set a couple of water goals in the early days of Cosia, and one for in situ, one for mining. So mining was a 30% reduction in use intensity, and in situ was a 50%. And so the thing to remember, and I said there are big differences between the two, the biggest single difference is the mining sector uses roughly 2 barrels of water per barrel of bitumen produced. The in situ sector uses 1/10 of that. So about 0.2 barrels of fresh water per barrel of bitumen produced. And so that's a dramatic difference. And there's very good reasons why that's the case. But as I often say, if you're going to worry about water in Alberta, you worry about the south and not the north. We should get into that as well, because that's a fun conversation. And if you're going to worry about water use in the oil and gas industry, you really focus on the mining sector and the oil sands, not the other sectors, because particularly the in situ sector is very thrifty by comparison. So.
I see. Let's get into we'll get into those things, and let's get into some of these water challenges that the organization puts out. They're quite interesting, and they have a very what I found very interesting about them is Cosia puts out these water challenges specific to water, and they have what they are looking for, the goals, the challenge that they're dealing with, and then they also have a list of things that would not that would sort of disqualify you from introducing your concepts or your technology. Can you just walk through that process? Because I think we've had people on this show that have these processes that they're trying to get in place. So I'm very interested to understand how that process works and how it's implemented across the various companies that your members are part of.
Yeah. So the challenges are one way of engaging, both locally in Alberta, throughout Canada, and globally, technology experts that can help us accelerate the pace of environmental performance improvement in the oil sands. And so challenges, it's only one way, but it's certainly one that you would see predominantly in our website these days, I think. And that challenge format is one where you're providing much more detail than we would normally, because if you want somebody to help solve your problem, you need to tell them more about the problem. And believe me, if people, and we see this all the time, and particularly with academics who do amazing work, but they tend to source their information about the oil sands from the general media, and so they have very myopic views of what the real problem is. And so what we do with these challenges is, to dispel those myths, we say, look, this is the actual challenge that we need addressed. And so the majority of the ones we have on the water side are for in situ water treatment and for steam generation. And then on the mining side, we have a water treatment one as well. And so, so on the in situ side, you'll get things like process flow diagrams, and so you can say, hey, if you want to put your widget here, this is what we need to remove, say, the silica from that boiler feed water before we send it to our once-through steam generators.
That it's such a good approach, because I've been to industry events where I've even seen large companies, of course I'm not going to name them, but I've seen large companies say, hey, we're looking for this solution to this, and it's so vague. And of course I'm doing these interviews and stuff, so I've looked around the room to sort of see how people are responding, and I know there's some very smart people in the room, and they look quite lost, actually. And so when I was reading through these challenges, the details that you're providing, it's basically like, if you have the competency and the ability to solve this very specific problem, let's talk. And it just eliminates that circle. But there must be a lot of work that goes into it on your end, on your organization's end, to be able to present that kind of detail.
Yeah, for sure. So we work with our members to create these, and they are based on members' priorities, right? And so we're not putting challenges out that aren't important for us to help, to engage third parties to help solve. And so, to be clear, members have solutions to these problems, because they're operating plants. They want better solutions to what they have. And so, at least part of what you have to tell them is, look, this is what we do now. And by the way, here's some of the things we've already tried. And so some of the new information, so, we're revising our challenge process and the documents. And so we're going to spend more time saying, hey, here's all the stuff we tried and it didn't work, and here's why we think it didn't
that's
work.
interesting.
So you get even more of, so, there's a lot of smart people around, but they can't help you if they don't understand your problem. And what was that Einstein's famous quote? If I had an hour to solve a problem, I would spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes solving it. And so we're trying to, we're nowhere near that, but we're trying to get much more information into the hands of folks right across the world, so that they are in a better position to help us.
It's so important. And again, I won't pretend to completely understand that these challenges, because I think I read through 3 or 4 of them yesterday, and they're pretty heavy duty. I mean, there's no way around that. But the way that they're presented, if I was in the position to solve, I would actually know what I'm trying to do. But then you're adding another layer to say what we've actually already tried, which is going to give even more direction.
For sure. Yeah.
The industry is, it's continually evolving, and there's still information. People still use terms like fossil fuels. They think they're coming from dinosaurs. There's these funny things that still float around in the industry. There really are. But I want to address specifically the water one. And I want to talk about some of the myths that are just sort of within that freshwater use within the industry. Could you touch on that a little bit, John?
Yeah. So I'll start by providing some perspective on water in Alberta, because it helps to start with that. So
yes,
roughly speaking, 90% of the water in Alberta is in the north. So the Peace River is the largest river in Alberta. It's 4 times the size of the Athabasca. But the Athabasca River is, I believe, bigger than all of the rivers in the south. And here's the problem. 90% of the freshwater demand is in the south of the province that has 10% of the fresh water. And 10% of the demand is in the north that has 90% of the water. So as I often say, we certainly have lots of challenges managing water, and I think we do it very, very well in the oil sands, but it would be infinitely more challenging if oil sands deposits were in the south, where there's so little fresh water relative to the Athabasca River. So we'll start with that, and then talk about how much water is used in the oil sands. And so our detractors are very, very good at using things like liters, because the liter's smaller than the cubic meter, and then their favorite one is the X number of Olympic-sized swimming pools. And I'm not gonna tell you those numbers aren't big, because they are, quite frankly. And so the mining sector, I already mentioned the mining sector uses about 10 times as much fresh water as the in situ sector. So let's just focus on the mining sector. Last year, it used about 155 million cubic meters of water to produce the bitumen it produces. That's a lot of fresh water. So what is that relative to a few things? So I'm going to talk about what it's relative to the total allocations in Alberta, and then what it is relative to the flows in the Athabasca River. So total allocations in Alberta are about 10 billion cubic meters. About 12% of that, or 1.2 billion cubic meters, are allocated to the oil and gas industry. And of that, almost 70% is allocated to the oil sands. And we already know the oil sands, more than 90% of it is used by mining.
Right.
But the oil, I already mentioned, mining uses 155 million cubic meters out of an allocation of about 800 million. So we're using, in terms of the total allocations in Alberta, it's about 1.2% of the total allocations in Alberta go to the mining sector. Perhaps not surprisingly, agriculture takes the largest block of freshwater allocation, and no one should be surprised by that. Next likely is, and I don't remember that date exactly, is municipalities, cities. There's a large demand for freshwater in cities, and so on, and other industrial sectors, and so that's how we stack up relative to total allocations, about 1.2% of the total allocations in Alberta.
I don't see a lot of those breakdowns. Sorry, John. I've never seen a lot of those breakdowns just circulating out in the public as much. It's probably be very helpful if a lot of more people that aren't in the industry understood that about Alberta, including myself. I didn't know that breakdown. So.
Yeah, well, you can look at everything with different lenses, can't you? And the folks who are not supporters of the oil sands, they will use Olympic-sized swimming pools and leaders, and they're not telling you something that isn't true. That's absolutely true. It's a lot of water. But the thing you got to ask yourself is this an environmental issue? Is this causing environmental problems? Because that's important, because the implication is that it does. So let's then talk about the Athabasca River. And so that amount of water. So the Athabasca River, the average flow is about 700 cubic meters per second. So that use represents about 0.7, not 7%, 0.7, less than 1% of the average flow in the Athabasca River. And this is important. You need to also consider what the use is relative to the lowest flows. Because
I was going to ask, is that average including winter runoff? That's a annual average?
That's a great question. So the lowest, statistically speaking, at least the lowest flow in the Athabasca River, weekly flow, that would occur about once every 10 years, is about 100 cubes a second. So one seventh the average flow. In 2018, I think the lowest weekly flow was closer to 200 cubes a second. But yeah, so you would typically see the lowest you're going to see in if you looked at all the weeks in a decade, you would see one week that would have 100 cubes a second. So of that, it's about 0.7% of the average flow, and less than 5% of the lowest flow you'd expect to see in a week every 10 years. So that's 5%. So that's, it's still a lot of water, and I'm not saying it isn't, and we're certainly trying to reduce how much we use, but at the same time, it's relative to a river the size of the Athabasca River, it's a relatively modest use, for sure.
And I want to clarify something, Mill, but when that water comes in, now I'm drawing a blank on the amount that's recycled. A big percentage of that water is also being reused. It's not like that one, if let's say it's at 1% or 0.7%, at 0.7%, it's not like that whole entire 0.7 gets used once and then it's dispersed, right?
No, absolutely. It gets used. If you have an upgrader, it gets reused, multiple times. It's both reused and recycled. So it goes into the upgrader, is recycled in the upgrader, then is blown down to the extraction circuit and recycled in the extraction circuit. And so, and by the way, the biggest stink for water, in other words, the reason why mining uses, and by the way, the data is right now we're at about 1.8 barrels of fresh water from the river and its tributaries relative to bitumen production. 1.8 barrels per barrel. But the reason it's that high is because you basically have to replace in the tailings deposit, you've removed the bitumen molecules and you have to replace them with something. So, and the density of bitumen and water is about the same. So the lowest theoretical use rate you could have in a water-based extraction process is 1. So you remove a molecule of bitumen, you replace it with a molecule of water. So we're at 1.8. So we're not, I mean, we can get closer to 1, but not a lot closer. And that's because God has arranged the ore deposit over the last 250 million years fairly neatly. But when you produce tailings, it doesn't rearrange itself in the same way, so it's a bit bulkier, and as a result, you end up with more than 1 barrel of water per barrel of bitumen. And so yeah, that's the arithmetic there. But yeah, it's reused. The recycle rate's about 80% overall, but we're not even counting the reuse.
Right. Yeah. No. It's and that's when you say it's a myth, then it's probably a combination of myth, misinformation, and then just lack of understanding too. I mean, if you see, it's like I drive a hybrid, and if I like hybrids and I get all the information about how good they are for the environment, which I like them, I have one, but then you do a little bit of research and realize what it takes to mine the car that I drive around. There's a whole nother stream of information you got to get, and you just got to be willing to take that time. And of course, I mean, we do it because we have a show, but it takes a lot of time to dig in to find all this information.
Yeah, philosophically at least, I don't know, whether 8 billion of us on this planet, we're going to have a profound impact on the environment. Whether we use fossil fuels, coal, or we're completely electrified, it won't matter. We are going to have a profound impact on the environment because if we transition to this fully electric future energy system, that uses metals that are rare earth metals, and you've got to mine like mad to get those. You produce tailings from them. You have to extract it. That produces waste. And so, and by the way, this is what engineers do for a living. We make sure that whatever we do, we minimize the effects on the environment, and it doesn't matter what it is. That's part of what we get paid to do, and love doing it, frankly. So.
Yeah, it's I'm very far from an engineer, John, and but I think everybody who watches the show knows that. But it fascinates me especially all the disciplines within engineering that have put this industry together. I mean, it is absolute. I mean, you could spend a lifetime and you wouldn't even scratch the surface of how this technology has developed and evolved across all these industries. It's absolutely amazing. One thing that I wanted to touch on too, and there's a couple more points that I think are important to note. But tailings pond, after the water's been used, and how close are we, do you think, that some of that water can actually be released back into the system? Or are there situations now where it is being done?
Well, so yeah, you got to differentiate between water that's used in the extraction circuit. We call that OSPW, oil sands processed water. And so differentiate between that and other forms of water on the site. And so, for instance, in terms of policy, there's industrial runoff, and then there's industrial wastewater. So industrial runoff, would be water, snow, freshet that melts, falls on the site, and so all operators can release that industrial runoff. They are allowed to release it. So there's lots of releases of industrial runoff in the oil sands region, and there are a few industrial wastewater releases. And so like Suncor, for instance, has a license and has had for decades a license to release treated water that's used in their upgrader. And so, what I will say is that virtually every industry on Earth that uses water returns water to the environment, treated water to the environment. That's a very normal thing to do. That the best analogy is, we use water every day in our homes, in our offices, and that water goes in, it becomes waste. It has to be treated before it's returned. And so the oil sands sector is the same as all other mining sectors. virtually all other industrial sectors and municipal sectors, at some point in time, you got to be able to treat and release that water. And there's an important reason why you need to do that. When these mine sites are reclaimed, and they will be reclaimed, it's a requirement to reclaim them to boreal forest and boreal, typical boreal forest ecosystem that would include both aquatic features and terrestrial features, and that the water on the site, you got to imagine the reclamation landscape. The water is all routed through streams into 1 or 2 or 3 pit lakes at the end, and then that water then returns to a tributary or to the Athabasca River itself. And if that doesn't happen, these mine sites are in what we would call perpetual care. That's a disaster from an environmental perspective, from a cost, from a taxpayer perspective, it doesn't make any sense to do so, and there's no need to do so because we've been studying this water for decades. We have dozens of different ways to treat it that treat it effectively and make it safe to release. So, and then the last thing I'll mention is, tailings are part of every surface mine. As you mentioned, most metal mines, a much larger percentage of the ore that's mined is actually tailings. And so, we hear people saying, well, we can eliminate the tailings ponds. Well, if you go away from aqueous extraction, then yeah, it's possible to eliminate tailings ponds. If you're using aqueous extraction, you're going to have tailings. You have to manage those tailings and then the water that goes with it. So, anyways, hopefully that answers the question. I'm not sure it did, actually.
Well, it's it spins off into another question for me. Where do you think? I mean, the industry, and of course we want to trumpet Canada, but an honest answer of where does Canada rank in this type of work, in reclamation and managing their water and efficiency in processes? From what you see, I mean, you're literally right in the center of the industry. Where do you see we rank if you had to sort of just take a shot at where you think we would be?
Yeah, so I'll try and answer that with a water lens, but I may give you a land example as well. But pit lakes is a great example, and so there's pit lakes. Virtually every surface mine on Earth has 1 or more pit lakes, because when you're finished mining, the very last hole that you dug, there's nothing to put in it, right? You've removed the ore. The tailings have gone into the previous pit, and now you have an empty hole. So most people are going to fill that with water, because if you want to fill it with something solid, you're going to produce a staggering amount of GHGs to do so, and it makes no sense to do that if you can fill it with water and do that safely, and then that water could be returned to the local ecosystem. So pit lakes, we've had world-renowned experts that whose career has been studying pit lakes, and one of them happens to be a person by the name of Dr. Devin Kastendijk. So we had him at a workshop a couple of years ago, and he was talking about pit lakes in the United States, which is, he's worked on other ones, but he has lots of expertise in that area. And he talked about the evolution of pit lakes. And so if you went back 60 or 70 years ago, pit lakes would just be that last hole. They would just let it fill with water naturally. And sometimes that turned out well, and sometimes it was a disaster. And so he called that, I think Generation 1 pit lakes. Generation 2 is, that's really not very responsible to do it that way. So we need to do a bit of lab work just to mix the rock with water to say, hey, do we have acid rock drainage, stuff like that. And a bit of modeling to say, if we fill it with water, with the lab work that we've done, what would the water quality look like over time, and how quickly would it self-remediate, because many of them do. So he called that a kind of a Gen 2. And then he said there's Gen 3 pit lakes. And Gen 3 pit lakes have the full gamut of research. And so there's lab work, and what we have in pit lakes is and we'll get into, I guess, the projects, but we've got 3 scales of testing. We've got mesocosms at Inotech, Alberta, near Vegreville. There's, I think, 36 of these mesocosms where we can test treatment technologies for pit lakes. Then Suncor has recently built a pit lake, a pilot pit lake And Syncrude has the first commercial pit lake, Syncrude's Base Mine Lake, and we can talk about the relative size of those maybe if we get into projects. But if you combine all that research, and research in pit lakes in the oil sands has been going on for 25 years, so these are probably the first and only Gen 3 pit lakes on Earth. Okay, no one has studied pit lakes as much as we have in the oil sands. Base Mine Lake's a great example. There's 6 different universities, Canadian universities, work on different aspects of Base Mine Lake. All of that research gets published, by the way. And so, yeah, this is absolutely world-class research that then gets shared with all the COSIA members. And so, yeah, I would say on the mining side, and we haven't gotten into the situ side much, but if we're talking about water use, mining is the bigger challenge, because we had a similar story in the in situ side, but certainly mining, when it comes to water technology, absolutely world class for sure.
That actually, because you've touched on the pit lakes, let's jump into those projects and kind of loop it together. Because can you you said that there's 3 different ones that are in. Can you just talk about the size and scale of those pit lakes right now?
Yeah, so the mesocosms are, and this is a typical approach. A mesocosm is a very small replica of a real commercial pit lake, and so the ones that we have at Initech, for some reason the total number that we have there is escaping me. It might be 24. I should know, but it's escaping me. But let's say it's 24 for now. And they're, I think, 15 cubic meters, so about 2.5 meters in diameter and 3 meters deep, or about that. And the beauty of that is that you can do replicas. So you have 4 of them that are, just water in them and just leave them. And then 4 of them where you try one tailings treatment and cover it with river water, and then 4 of them with another tailings treatment and cover it with process water, and so on. And so, but you could do these replicas. And so the mesocosm, the scale is tiny, but the beauty of it is you can do replication and get very good data from that. Plus, you can quickly test new technologies, new treatment technologies, to see how efficacious they are. So that's the smallest scale. Then the next scale up is pilot pit lakes. And so Syncrude actually built a bunch of them between 1989 and 1992, and they're all still there, by the way. But more recently, Suncor has created Lake Mewasin, which is also a pilot pit lake. Now it's about, I think, 65 meters by 250 meters, about 10 meters deep. But it's a pilot lake, so it sounds like a decent size pond, but it's a small pilot, and it's about 1/500th the size of Base Mine Lake, which is Syncrude's commercial one. So back to Suncor's, they have an incredibly detailed and comprehensive research plan. And so what they're testing there, they did smaller scale testing earlier, so they wanted to scale it up, and they're testing a new tailings treatment technology that will really accelerate the water quality improvement on the cap water in that tailings deposit. And they've coupled that with treatment wetlands, so that what we expect in the reclamation landscape is many of these pit lakes will flow through treatment wetlands, which would just be a polishing step before it's returned to a local water body. And so they're also piloting that work. So tens of millions of dollars in just capital just to install it, and a lot of money each year to do the research. And then you scale it to Base Mine Lake, which is 8 square kilometers. Now this is a big one, about 60 meters deep, about 260 million cubic meters total. And that's the one that's got 6 different universities with, probably 60 researchers doing research on that. So yeah, and we let me just since Base Mine Lake is the biggest one, I'll talk a little bit more about that. It was established, I think, in 2013, and perhaps not surprisingly, the water on the surface at the time was toxic. So what makes the water toxic is naturally occurring organic material in the bitumen that preferentially goes into the water column, and it's toxic to rainbow trout, and so would fail an acute toxicity test. And And 7 years on, it's about 4 years in, it was no longer acutely toxic, so it would pass the acute toxicity test, and now it passes almost all chronic toxicity tests for almost all species. And so, and that's without any active treatment, other than one where they had a bit of cloudiness in the water column, and they treated it with alum and made the water clearer again. And so in 7 years, it's gone from acutely toxic to basically almost the water quality you'd expect in any boreal forest pit lake. And there's tons of research to support how that happened, and so on. And so hopefully that that puts some perspective on the amount of research. And so what I didn't mention about Cosia that I was supposed to is, to date, we've shared, members between each other shared over 1,000 technologies. It costs about $1.4 billion to develop. And on the water side, currently our project portfolio, I think we got 90 active projects, and the cost of those active projects is $400 million. Okay, so this is a big research program in Cosia, and certainly a very big one on the water side.
And I was going to ask, in all these facilities that you've mentioned, and all these tests and everything that they're doing, is this all shared information, or how do they do internal testing and then distribute out the information when they're ready as the companies, and then it's filtered through Cosia? How does that setup work?
Well, so like any good research work, you want to make sure you got the data right before you share it widely. But yeah, shortly after they have the data and they're comfortable that they have, that they've done due diligence in terms of how they manage the data, analyze the data, and so on, then they share it with all the other members. In some cases, the research, if it's done through academia, it's all published. Okay, it's all eventually published in peer-reviewed journals. And so Base Mine Lake is a good example of that. All of that work that's been going on for the last 7 years is all being published. But certainly, if you're not doing research, so if you've got proprietary technologies, and we got some good examples of that, then it's still shared. Once you've got the data from the pilot results and you're comfortable that it makes sense, then you share it with all the other members, and everybody gets use rights. And so if they want to use that technology in their own facility, they are allowed to do that. That's what being in a COSIA member means. So.
I want to get into a couple, as we sort of wrap up the show, John. I want to touch on a couple of these proprietary ones that you just mentioned. I believe these are the ones. There's ones through steam generators, OTSG, and there's a term I saw coming up a lot in the information, the Water Technology Development Center. And you can clarify which organization or which company has that. Can you talk about a couple of those facilities quickly?
Yeah, I would love to, because we spend a good chunk of the time on mining. So these are both in situ ones, which are, and there's tons of super exciting things going on in that sector as well. But let's start with the smaller of the two. And so almost all of the steam, so I mentioned earlier that for the in situ sector, you produce steam and inject it underground, and then draw the bitumen out once you've heated it up. And so most of the steam is produced using once-through steam generators, and the reason it is because the water's fairly dirty. The recycle rates are quite high, and so the salts and these deposits are all, some very salty, some modestly salty. But when you inject steam in and you draw that water out, it's drawing salts out of the deposit as well. Plus, the makeup water isn't fresh. The majority of their makeup water is saline makeup water as well. So you can get salts building up in the circuit, and so you call these dirty boilers because you're feeding them with fairly high dissolved solids. So you can imagine, your kettle, if you have hard water in your area, your kettle's going to salt up really quickly. And so this is super salty water that's being fed to these OTSGs. And so typically they run them at a steam quality of about, less than 80%, because if you try and make all of that water into steam in your boiler in one pass, all of that stuff comes into your tubes. The tubes coat up, they're fire boilers, so there's a lot intense heat on the outside, and the tubes fail, and your boiler wouldn't last 2 weeks. And so they run low steam qualities, but there's a penalty for that, an environmental penalty. So you can improve greenhouse gas efficiency of an operation if you increase the steam quality. And so back to that pilot facility, what we're doing there is right now there's 3 pilot units and a 4th one being built, and it's testing. So these are very small scale, a single OTSG tube, and it's testing treatment technology to minimize fouling and to minimize erosion corrosion. The work is done at through SAIT and through U of C, and U of A has a piece of that as well. And so, the total investment in that research program is about, I think it's north of $12 million when we're done. And so, what it's going to allow you to do is test under very controlled conditions at a scaled down version. How to minimize fouling so you can increase your steam quality in your commercial boilers and then reduce your greenhouse gas emission. It cuts, if you go from 89%, 20% of the water left is blow down. In the case of 90% steam quality, only 10%. So you cut your blow down by half and so on. And so lots of advantages of higher steam quality, but risks of tube failure. So you don't want to risk your commercial facilities until you've tested it properly. So that's a great example of technology development using a pilot scale with U of C, U of A, and SAIT. And then the second one is a rather, I haven't gotten to it yet, but that's $140 million pilot facility, a much larger scale pilot facility that's physically at Suncor's Firebag site. And it's basically, it can test every unit operation in a central processing facility. So the deoiling part, the water, oil removal from the water, silica removal, hardness removal, steam generation, waste blow down, plus testing new analyzers and new process control schemes. And so, yeah, that is a world-class pilot facility that started up a year ago.
So again, I want to circle back to that. So that facility is on Suncor's, that's obviously on their property or on their site. So now, are they collaborating with other organizations, or are you facilitating? Where does that, or is that more of an outward thing from Suncor? If we can get that sort of detail.
Yeah. So the members of, I better get this right. So members of WTDC are Canadian Natural. Now Canadian Natural has bought Shell and Devon assets, so they were both members as well. So Canadian Natural has the largest share of that pilot facility now. And then Suncor and Husky and who am I? I'm missing somebody. Okay, this is bad. I'm supposed to know.
Oh, we got time. We got time, John. We can remember.
Anyway, it'll. Who am I missing? Canadian Natural, Husky. Oh, and Nexen. Nexen is as a member as well. Yeah. And so it's 4 members, but again, it's the same model in COSIA.
Same model.
Yeah, exactly. So they do the research. Now, if you happen to be an owner of the facility, you'll get the data first, and you'll see the reports first. But again, once you're satisfied that they're in good shape, then the operating companies that aren't part of WTDC get to see all those results as well. And so that's the great thing about the COSIA model is everybody's working on all of this stuff and they're all sharing all of it. So
yeah, it's really these I run into these interviews fairly frequently where they're quite, you hope that the guests like yourself can provide the information, because it's quite. On the surface, if you look at it, it's like, oh, they recycle the water. Okay, that's fine. That's easy. But as soon as you start to actually go in a couple layers in, and these testing facilities and the pilot plant, the pilot facilities, but then the smaller testing facilities, it gets quite complicated. And so it's good to have someone like yourself on who can actually lay some of this stuff out, and even how the companies are collaborating together. And it, like you said, your members make up 90% of the industry. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
What there's a couple to sort of wrap up, John. I want to go, where do people, because you send out information quite frequently, is that right? I hope I'm not speaking wrong here. You have a newsletter that you send out, and obviously there's a lot of activity on social media like LinkedIn and things like that. And we'll bring it up on the screen as well, where is the best sort of area to get a stream of information coming from COSIA? And then let's touch on membership as well as we wrap up.
Okay, so so we've have a website, and so obviously there's lots of information on the website. but it really depends on what information you're looking for. So the performance goals that I mentioned, if you go to the water portion of our website, you'll see our 2 performance goals, the mining one, the in situ one, the 30% reduction goal for mining, 50% reduction goal for in situ. So, and then you'll see, as you saw, those challenges. We're just in the process, as I mentioned, of revising them, making them a lot better. What we've done recently, and this was actually piloted by our land group, is they produce these research summaries. And so, as you can imagine, I gather you have some idea of the amount of technology development that goes on and is shared within COSIA. And these reports would take up libraries full of information, but it's too much for any reasonable person to digest. And so what our land group did, and we have followed suit, is produce these research summaries. So they're typically 2 or 3 pages per project. And so now the bigger projects like Base Mine Lake get about 10 or 12 pages because there's so much information.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
But yeah, so on the mining side and on the in situ side, we have 2 research reports. In fact, we published our 2nd mining one and our 1st in situ one. So if you want more information about the work that we're doing, it's on our website as well. You go into those resources on the water side, and you'll see these research summaries, and that is a fairly concise summary of all of the work that we're doing in this area. And so that's certainly very helpful as well. I think particularly if you're a researcher or an entrepreneur interested in developing technology.
And on the membership side, I just want to clarify, because I said about the newsletter and information you have, and then said about membership. The membership, these are organizational memberships, right? These are oil producers, and it's not. I don't sign up and pay $5 a month to be a member or anything like that. I just wanted to clarify that, because I kind of laid it out like that.
Yeah. So yeah, each of our members is an owner. They get 1 share. They got 1 share each, and they vote. They fund us, and they vote with the same formula as the funding formula, and it's half fixed, half variable. So even the companies with no production, and we have some that are still in that boat. They still get, if we had 10 members, they would get 5% vote and 5% of the funding. And of course, our biggest players. So the other half is based on production. So if you know production, you don't get allocated the other half. But if you're a big producer, you get a good chunk of that other half. And so that's how we manage contribution between members. And but yeah, you need to own an oil sands lease. You don't actually have to be producing, but you need to own an oil sands lease to be a member of COSIA. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll get to work on that. I'll get my membership. No, thank you, John, for coming on the show. It's I think if we were to do this interview about 10 more times, I think I would probably be able to help provide even better information to facilitate. But I think the information you shared, especially about the water and that water myth section for me, really stood out. And because on a personal level, it's information that I knew of, but I didn't understand. And even reading through the information, I couldn't quite piece it all together, because I'm reading about the recycling the water in one section and the Athabasca River in the other section. So it's hard to kind of coordinate it, and then runoff rates when it's at lowest, and all this type of information. So just laying that out was really helpful to me. I hope you enjoyed being on the show, because it really was important information this is a public show. You don't need to sign up to watch it or anything like this. So the people in the public that just get to have the information now. So I really do appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure. It was very enjoyable. You're a fun guy to chat with. Much appreciated.
All right. Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody, for watching this show. I really, really would encourage you to go to COSIA's website. And again, we'll have links to it and everything like that. It's such good information. And because their membership are these major producers, it's a wide platform of different streams of knowledge. So please go on to it, check it out. Thank you for watching the show. Please subscribe, keep suggesting guests, and tell us how to make the show better for you to watch. Thank you, everyone. See you on the next episode of Crownsmen Energy.
Thank you for watching. Please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn. Also, if you would like to help support the production of the show, head on over to crownsmen.com/donations. There are two options, the $5 monthly subscription option and the support heavy industry one-time donation option. Again, that is crownsmen.com/donations. Thank you again so much for watching. Thank you to our sponsors, Pipeline Machinery International, Savannah Equipment, and Power Zone Equipment. We will see you guys on the next episode.